Good afternoon, and welcome to the Reinvestment Task Force meeting of July 24th, 2025. I'm Henry Foster, co-chair of the San Diego City County Reinvestment Task Force. I call this meeting of the San Diego City County Reinvestment Task Force order at 2:06 p.m. For the record, let's now have each member of the RTF or their representative today introduce themselves by providing their name and organization.
Sure. I'm Kwafi Reed. I'm the president and CEO of San Diego Habitat for Humanity.
Hello, my name is Jared Hernandez. I'm the director of CSA San Diego.
Adolfo Ventura to the man.
I'm Jane with KP Morgan Jason.
Enrique Mesa with US Bank.
Stephen Russell with the San Diego Housing Federation.
And I'm Henry Foster, City of San Diego.
Also Gresham, San Diego Housing Commission.
Peter Armstrong, Lakeland Housing and Development Corporation.
Oliver Wilson, Wells Fargo.
Jimmy Chan with San Diego.
Angela Zappio with Accessity.
All right, thank you everyone for the quick introductions, and thank you to the public for being here as well. Members of the public who wish to provide comments to the board will need to complete a speaker slip. Please provide your speaker slip to our staff in the room. With that, I have an update on today's agenda before we get started. Items 7 and 8 will be returned to staff, and we will not be hearing those items today. We will now move on to item 2, non-agenda public comment. Non-agenda public comment is an opportunity for the public to comment on items not on the agenda today. Members of the public will have 3 minutes each to provide their comments about agenda items or non-agenda public comments. When I call your name, please step to the podium, state your name for the record, and begin making your comments. Clerk, do we have any members of the public who have requested to provide non-agenda public comment? All right, having no public comment at this time, we will conclude the non-agenda public comment time. We will now move on to item 3, task force member comments. This is the time for members to provide any announcements, news, or updates. I will begin by thanking all of the task force members for the work we've done over the past few months to review and provide feedback on the bylaws and the master plan. The San Diego Housing Commission staff has been working hard with legal counsel to ensure we are taking the appropriate steps to revise the bylaws and master plan. Thank you everyone for your collaboration and feedback. With that, do any other members have any announcements, news, or updates they would like to provide? Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to share Accessity has some educational events coming up for small business owners. So we're currently accepting applications for the Accessity Academy for Entrepreneurial Success, which is an 8-week training program where people who are looking to start or formalize a small business can learn all the foundations they need to know about how to do that. They graduate with their business plan, their financial projections, marketing plan in place, and then they can access up to a $5,000 loan from Accessity for startup costs. So applications are open until August 3rd, about another week, and people can apply by going to accessityacademy.org. And then we also have an event coming up it'll be August 20th from 10 to 11 a.m., a free webinar called Get Funded, Simple Steps to Finance Your Small Business, which will present different financing options, what lenders are looking for. So a great opportunity for small businesses to learn about access to capital.
All right, thank you for that. Any other?
Thank you. I also have a couple of educational events to talk about. First of all, on the 28th of August, we will be co-hosting with the California Housing Partnership an all-day seminar on tax credit financing. It's the fundamentals of affordable housing, and it has been really useful in past years for not just junior developers in the field to check their skills, but also it's been really valuable bringing in community members who are working with developers to better understand the language, some conditions around finance. We've also had great success. We are inviting one staff member from every elected's office in the county of San Diego to also participate. Just because it is such an important issue of our times, and complexity is something that we hope that we can bring down some of the barriers to understanding. So again, that will be August 28th from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. at Central Library in Big Auditorium downtown. You can visit our website at housingsandiego.org and have all the information about fundamentals of affordable housing. Second, very briefly, I'll say our annual conference is coming up on the 16th of October. We really recommend it's an opportunity to learn more about affordable housing, all aspects of it, from development, finance, design, human services. It's an all-day affair at the area of Marquee. And again, housingsandiego.org. All the details. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or announcements? Please, Peter.
First, a couple announcements and good news. Wakeland, we're super pleased and happy that we are starting construction of a 190 unit affordable housing community in Mission Valley, West Mission Valley, which hope we don't have any golfers here. It's on the Riverwalk golf course footprint. We're very pleased to be working with Hines, the master developer, and a lot of community partners to bring that project to fruition. At one point in time, the master developer was very concerned about, providing the affordable housing in a timely manner. And it turns out we're the first project coming out of the ground in that master plan. So, roughly 2 years from now, there'll be 190 units for families in a great location. Second, Wakeland is partnering with Price Philanthropies on a new project in City Heights at El Cajon in Fairmont. We do have some commercial space that might be a good home for a nonprofit who's providing services or other benefits in City Heights. Just wanted to make folks aware of that. That site is probably going to be finished construction about March or April of next year. And so we're, looking for good partners to help fill that space.
All right, thank you for that. Any other comments, announcements? All righty, having none, we will move on to the next agenda item. The next item is item 4, approval of the minutes of the May 15th, 2025 Reinvestment Task Force meeting. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Okay, having none, we'll entertain, we will now go to discussion and I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move approval of minutes.
We have a first.
Second.
We'll have a second by Adolfo. Any discussion? Having none, clerk, please call for the vote. We'll have, I tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we signify by the usual sign of aye, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Having none, item passes unanimously. Thank you. Alrighty, now we will go to the next item, which is item number 5, the staff report. This is an informational item, so no motion is required. With that, Marcel Gresham, RTF staff and Director of Special Programs Development, will now provide the staff report. Marcel?
Thank you, Co-Chair Foster. RTF members, just in regards to the bylaws and the planning, which obviously we won't be hearing those for action items today, but we are working towards that. We will be bringing that item back for you all to make an actual decision on with regards to legal services review of the bylaws. I want to ensure that everything is in compliance as we need it to be. And so there will be some recommendations that you all to go on at the next opportunity. And then with regards to the planning item, again, the survey was submitted to each of them to be able to provide your feedback and comments with regards to how the planning may take place. And so you also have a narrative of some of the feedback that has been provided up to this point. But if any of you all who did not have the opportunity to complete that survey previously and would like to, please just email me, and then we'll make sure that you have a link that's available for you to do so. And again, we'll come back with some other items that might have some appropriate time. That concludes my staff report. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you for that, Marcel. Clerk, do we have any public comment for this item?
No.
Having none, again, this is an informational item, so no motion is required. I will now turn to our members for any comments and or questions. Comments or questions? Having none, very good. That concludes item number 5. With that, that will bring us to our information agenda and item number 6, the California Community Reinvestment Act. Staff from Rise Economy is here to provide a presentation. If we will come forward to the podium and we can begin. Let us know how much time you need for your presentation. Introduce yourself and we will go from there.
Chair, our speaker will actually be online today.
All right, very good.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Doni Tedesi. I use any pronouns. I'm the Southern California organizer for Rise Economy, and I'm looking forward to this presentation on the California Reinvestment or Community Reinvestment Act. I have a slideshow to share. It'll take about, I think, 15 minutes, 10 minutes for the presentation, maybe 5 minutes for any questions or answers. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. Are you all able to see that when I do it?
Yes.
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 Okay. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for the members of the task force for giving me an opportunity to share about, broadly the California, our vision for California level Community Reinvestment Act, and specifically on AB 801, which is legislation in the current legislative cycle to create such a program. So, as I mentioned, my name is Doni Tedesi. I'm with Rise Economy. We are a member coalition, advocacy coalition in California, statewide, close to 300 members, working to reverse the impacts and the legacy of redlining in our communities. We do this by holding banks accountable for their role in creating generative economies for communities of color, low-income communities to build wealth and thrive. This is implemented primarily through bank advocacy work. We work primarily with the Federal Community Reinvestment Act to encourage lending and investments in low or moderate income communities and previously redline communities. So we typically negotiate community benefits agreements that spell out exactly how banks are going to meet community credit needs. So I'm going to go through a few pieces, generally how money will flow in our local economies, a little bit of background about our work, examples of reinvestment impacting our communities, and then get into the actual policy proposal, and then more about the actual bill that is set to implement this state level Community Reinvestment Act. So many folks are familiar with the Community Reinvestment Act, the federal level. I don't think I need to get into too much detail here, but it is our nation's anti-redlining law, and it has this mandate to banks that they must meet community credit needs, including low or moderate income communities. And through this, we've been able to generate hundreds of billions of dollars in community reinvestment, primarily through community benefits agreements that have been negotiated when banks are merging. That typically is the best leverage point in the process to ensure that as banks are consolidating, which typically will impact our communities negatively, loss of jobs, loss of lending investment activity, we step in to negotiate these community benefits agreements to ensure that banks are still meeting community benefits needs, and also that those mergers are actually returning a substantial benefit to our communities. That it's not enough to just do what the two banks were doing beforehand. You actually have to do more so that our communities are sharing in the benefit from that consolidation. So there are many benefits that we have enjoyed as a result of the federal CRA. LIHTC, for example, many banks are invested in the low-income housing tax credit, in part due to their CRA obligations. I think the number is about 85% of all LIHTC has been motivated by CRA. I don't think I need to sell that to this crew, but it's just to show that there's been tremendous impact. Unfortunately, it's not a complete law. There's some flaws in the federal CRA that have drawn our attention to it. So one is that there's limited coverage. It just covers banks and not all of the financial institutions that have come up since the 1970s when the federal CRA was passed. So this includes independent mortgage companies, certainly credit unions, and then also financial technology companies. So money transmitters like PayPal and Cash App, Venmo, institutions that are behaving like banks, taking deposits, but don't have this reinvestment obligation. So outside of limited coverage, there's a federal oversight in terms that we see in grade inflation. So 96% of banks pass their CRA examinations, which is, every 2 to 3 years, banks are examined on how well they're meeting their reinvestment obligations. 96% pass, which we can understand as being a sign of grade inflation. If 96% of banks were meeting those needs, many of us would probably be in different lines of work. Another issue with the federal CRA is that it only covers income. It deals in race-neutral language, which is a shame as our nation's anti-redlining law, that there isn't a particular look at how banks are meeting the specific needs of communities of color who have been shut out of fair access to credit. That was the inspiration, the impetus behind the federal CRA. So in its implementation, it being race neutral is certainly a concern of ours and a great loss. Lastly here, I will say the federal CRA does not do any downgrades for harm. There's very little enforcement if banks aren't meeting their CRA obligations. For example, banks are able to, I think 11 of the 17 consent decrees against banks that were filed by the Department of Justice for instances of redlining. 11 of those banks had either a satisfactory or outstanding CRA rating. So it's a sign that shows us that there's weak implementation or weak enforcement, and certainly no downgrades for harm like investments into bad landlords or investments into oil and gas companies or investments that are or instances of redlining by banks. But through this imperfect system, we've been, as I mentioned, been able to negotiate hundreds of billions of dollars in community reinvestment, and that's yielded investments, lending in our communities. So I just have a couple examples from our member organizations just to sort of illustrate from negotiation, commitments to actually realizing the kind of community and economic development projects that we'd want to see in our communities. So this is one example from Burbank Housing in Santa Rosa. They were able to develop a 64-unit affordable housing project in part through low-income housing tax credits that were purchased by First Citizens Bank, as well as a construction loan that they also got from First Citizens Bank. That's a bank that we have a CBA with, and both the LIHTC and the development loan were part of the bank's CRA activity. So this is the federal CRA in action. Another example is Little Tokyo's mixed-use affordable housing development. 248 units, 100% affordable, again, financed by investments by U.S. Bank, encouraged by their CRA obligations. And lastly, a small business example is Alubia's Kitchen in Santa Barbara. This is a family-owned small business that grew from a local food truck to a brick-and-mortar restaurant. and they were supported by a local CDFI that received EQ2 investments or capital investments from Wells Fargo to be able to do this work. So they helped them consolidate their existing loans, free up a significant amount of cash to be able to hire additional staff and actually take on a lease for a brick and mortar. And so this CDFI was able to do that because of that EQ2 investment from Wells Fargo. This is, again, an example of the bank's CRA activity. So what we're proposing is a California level state CRA to really substantially improve and expand the work that community organizations are doing by providing greater access to capital. So by expanding the number of institutions that are covered under a reinvestment obligation through the state, we're thinking independent mortgage companies, state chartered banks and credit unions, and fintech companies. And by giving them this affirmative obligation to meet the financial service needs of LMI and communities of color, we see that billions of dollars can be generated to be able to go into affordable housing development and preservation, support the critical work that CDFIs are doing by providing access to capital to disadvantaged communities, and by actually increasing pathways to home ownership and small business development and entrepreneurship in low-income communities. And so through a state CRA, they'd be evaluated. A lot of the issues with the federal CRA could be covered, providing downgrades for harm, highlighting, prioritizing the kinds of investments that we want to see in our communities, making sure it's race conscious, that there aren't instances of great inflation, and then also consequences for poor performance, and actually adding some pieces of enforcement. Now, this isn't a novel idea. Many states, I know it's hard to believe that California isn't on the cutting edge of really anything, but in the state CRA realm, 7 other states plus DC have established some version of a state level community reinvestment act. And it's working. They've been able to demonstrate increased lending and investments, also resilience from disasters. So as a result of this infrastructure, they've been able to provide more loans, or institutions in their states have been able to provide more loans and provide greater access to capital. So it's not new. Other states have been doing it. And the CFPB actually released a report in 2023 that summarizes all of the various state CRAs, the institutions that they cover, kind of the impetus for their adoption. So if folks are interested, that's a really great resource to look into. So you might be asking, why now? Why do we need a state level CRA? I think some folks can guess some of these pieces. There's unprecedented community needs. Even before this year, there were significant needs for affordable housing, community development that just were not being met. Government funds alone are not able to meet this need. We know that federal funds are drying up. There are potential clawbacks of the CDFI fund, funds to support affordable housing development, small business, SBA, all of these things that have historically facilitated the flow of capital are potentially drying up. We also know that the California budget is very limited at this time, and they're very not likely to appropriate more funds for the kinds of activities that we want to see in our communities. And we also know that corporate dollars are unlocked by the CRA, and that bank regulators and agencies at the federal level are retreating and being gutted. So we're in an environment where federal protections are waning, federal enforcement of reinvestment obligations is waning. And so we actually need a state level, California, to step up and say, we are going to insulate as much of our economy and support our economy as possible to weather this time, and also just increase the amount of reinvestment and access to capital. Lastly, there are new players in the financial sector. As I mentioned, independent mortgage companies are accounting for 50 to 70% of mortgage originations in California, and they don't have a reinvestment obligation. Fintech companies are holding billions of dollars and processing billions of dollars of transactions from consumers, and yet again, they don't have a reinvestment obligation. And the the thinking around why banks were included in the first place would follow directly to these institutions if the CRA was being created today, but it is not. So the state needs to be able to step in and cover these institutions. So we have developed a legislative ask. So AB 801 by Assemblymember Bonta was a bill that we introduced earlier this year, working with SEIU California, the California Housing Partnership, and Inclusive Action for the City. And this would do all of that, covering these various institutions, encouraging loans, investments, and services in low and moderate income and BIPOC communities, adding consequences for harm, for poor behavior and poor performance, and then also incentivizes and considers whether financial institutions are actually meeting community needs. So this is a variety of needs: rural communities, tribal communities, low to moderate income communities, and communities of color. So we presented this diagram just to show folks how this would work in practice. This might be a little too 101 for folks, but it's kind of helpful in visualizing, where the capital sources are coming from. It's coming from fintech, mortgage companies, under state CRA, that is, from credit unions, and then going to providing direct lending to CDFIs or to consumers, direct investments into CDFIs, financial institutions that fund CDFIs, developers, and local governments through very low interest investments, potential social impact bonds, low-income housing tax credits, and grants. There would be regulatory oversight through the state. State regulators, the DFPI in particular, would collect and publish CRA compliance data for the public input during these assessments. And all of this would have the impact of creating community benefits. So our communities would gain equitable access to financial services, affordable housing, and economic development resources. So I believe that's all I have in terms of presentation. So to give folks an update, I'll stop sharing my screen. To give folks an update on this bill, we had made it through much of the legislature. We started in the assembly, got out of the assembly, and were due to be heard in the Senate Banking and Finance Committee. Unfortunately, our author decided to hold the bill, so we had more time to continue to build our base of support, increase our research so that we can push back against some of the opposition. Our position is primarily credit unions at the moment, the credit unions, and then independent mortgage companies, and certainly fintech has been writing up. But credit unions, independent mortgage companies seem to be the most vocal opposition, and so there was a consideration that we need some more time to continue to educate all of the new legislators that are in the chambers on the CRA, the impact that this would have on communities, and then build up our research, and also just increase as I said, the base of support. So at the moment, it's a 2-year bill, so it's still alive. It's unfortunate that we had to pause, but it's going to come back again next year. And so in part why I'm here is to share this information with you all. We would greatly benefit from the support of the task force and the constituent members of the task force. I'm not sure if there's a process of endorsing state legislation, but having the endorsement of a body that very deeply understands reinvestment, particularly from a region like San Diego, is going to be very helpful. So I'm happy to share that information and also take more questions. I neglected to mention that this bill was a California Legislative Black Caucus priority bill, which we were very grateful for. As I mentioned, it's first and foremost an anti-redlining bill, and so the connections to racial equity could not be more clear. So in addition to endorsements, sign-ons from your constituent groups within the task force, any examples of stories of the CRA working in your communities. I know there were lots of affordable housing developers that were mentioned in in the lineup of the task force. I think helping legislators understand that this work is being done in part because of CRA motivated investments by banks is going to be critical in being able to get this pushed to the finish line. So perhaps I'll stop there. I'm sure I went over time, but I wanted to make some time in case folks have any questions.
Alrighty, thank you for the presentation. We will now turn to the clerk for any public comment.
No public comment.
Having none, I will now turn it over to task force members for questions and comments. Any questions or comments regarding the presentation of the bill? Okay, yes, please.
Yeah, no, just, I appreciate the bringing this forward to us. Certainly, we have seen a great value with CRA in our communities. And the fact that credit unions have not been a part of really making the same kinds of contributions is an intriguing concept. I'd like to understand more. Actually, as much as I'd like to see things done in a timely manner, the extra time this bill has is something I think we can use to study.
Very well said. Yes, please.
I think there's a real opportunity to have some of the other players who maybe haven't been around the table, particularly at fintech and some of the other folks who are holders of capital, also play a role and benefit and from the work that we all do with CRA investments. And if there's nothing else accomplished by this bill, I would think and hope that the financial partners who have been seated around the table would see the benefit of having those other groups have similar obligations and calls to also invest. So I'm interested in learning more and seeing where it goes.
Very good. Anything else?
I have to say I'm, very much in favor of a state level CRA. Wakeland as a nonprofit affordable housing developer, we've seen lots of investment in our projects by CRA motivated investors. My project in starting construction in Mission Valley is being construction loan being funded by Chase. So Chase and all of the other banks that are sitting around the table have been long-term partners with Wakeland, and we really appreciate it. And certainly the terms that we are receiving on our construction loans, our equity investments, EQ2 loans to Wakeland to support our pipeline and our operations, those have all been very fundamental to Wakeland's success. And I think at this moment in time where a lot of what is happening in Washington, D.C. feels like it's beyond my control. And we know that there's been this long arc of, potential changes to the federal CRA. I think now is a great time to have a state level CRA that is, the policymakers in California can have more sway over, and we can have more local input and enforcement and, really figure out, strategies that benefit California. So I'm very much in favor of, state level CRA. And I also think this kind of puts a point on the work that we're talking about around the RTF's advocacy, and our mission and purpose and business plan.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you. And again, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of quick questions from myself. It looks like as part of the bill, there's a community reinvestment fund that is being proposed. Can you talk a little bit about how those allocations will be done or the appropriations? Or I see where there's some potential fines and so forth that are proposed that will go into the fund. And I'm hoping that's not the only way that we are developing a fund. Can you talk a little bit about that process or intent?
Sure. Just to clarify, You're asking about a community reinvestment fund that's in the bill?
Correct. It's my understanding that this bill would establish the community reinvestment fund within the state treasury.
No, no. So this would establish a community reinvestment act at the state level. It would be housed within the DFPI, and it would essentially be an obligation, or this sort of affirmative obligation to these financial institutions to do increased lending and investments in communities. So there isn't a fund that is being developed. It's possible you might be thinking about, I think there was some question around if institutions, let's say like fintech companies, aren't equipped or set up to make direct investments or create lending products for communities as part of their CRA, if they could potentially invest or make contributions into a fund. But as the bill stands at the moment, there isn't a community reinvestment fund being established through the Treasurer's Office.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess in regards to the credit unions and I guess some of their concerns, can you kind of let us know what those are? I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think there was some question earlier about involving other stakeholders. You know, some of the pushback that we've gotten from credit unions, one is that this obligation is too onerous on the very basics of reporting their reinvestment activity to a state regulator. They're saying would cost a significant amount of money and staffing. Now, it's true that they will have to staff up a bit to meet this reinvestment obligation, but a lot of credit unions are already doing community development oriented work, and so it'd be quite nominal, this increase in their budgets, and they would have to staff up, yes. So that's one piece. But what we've seen from other states is that credit unions are able to do that. In almost all of the other state CRAs, credit unions are covered. And so it's something that they've been very easily able to absorb. And what we've seen with banks is that when we have our community benefits agreements, they last for about 5 years. And so during that time, they're increasing their capacity to make loans, investments in communities. They're establishing new relationships. They're staffing up to be able to meet this need. What we see is that once that CBA is concluded at the end of the 5 years, they very rarely revert back to their old staffing or investment levels. They actually continue at that level, even when there isn't an active agreement. And that's because it has yielded them significant profits. It's certainly like a win-win for both the community and the financial institution. And so that's what we're seeing, and that's what we envision for credit unions as well. So that's one piece. Is, they claim it's just too onerous, that they're already doing community-oriented work as nonprofits. But one piece that I forgot to mention in the presentation is that, while credit unions are nonprofits and in some cases are engaged deeply with the community, the DFPI has released significant amount of data on financial institutions in California that are charging overdraft fees, insufficient fund fees. These are fees that essentially penalize people for being poor or not being able to make ends meet. A $5 gallon of milk that you couldn't afford ends up being a $35 charge that then is charged every single day until you're able to get back to zero on your account. So these kinds of fees we've recognized and understood within the financial inclusion space to be quite predatory and harmful to low-income communities. And credit unions are actually the worst offenders of this. The top 20, if you take a look at the top 20 financial institutions, over half of them that are charging the most in overdraft fees are credit unions. So we find it a little hard to kind of square that circle, right? You can say you're serving the communities on one hand, but then if you're also, overusing these predatory fees as a way to beef up your revenue, there needs to be some kind of reinvestment obligation, some kind of oversight to ensure that communities are benefiting. So those are the pieces that we hear most often from credit unions. It's like the reporting, just an onerous obligation, which we have examples from other states to show that it's not, and that they're already doing community-oriented work. We have data to show that they're actually in some cases harming our communities and should be involved in a reinvestment infrastructure network.
Alrighty, thank you for that. I think that was good information, and I think I just saw an article that went out in Richard impacting the area. A certain group that I think is amazing to see that item in the paper. Let me ask this last question, and it's something that we struggled with in the district that I represent, and I do think the state moving in this direction is a good thing, gives us a little more control in meeting our overall state objectives and what we're trying to accomplish, especially with everything that's going on at the federal level and the discourse and the contentious environment that we find ourselves in at this point. How about, and I haven't reviewed the bill in detail, but how about things like when we talk about helping communities of concern, actually having branches in those communities? We tend to find there's a bank in particular that has kind of flooded my district with just access to the ATM machines versus actually having brick and mortar that the folks can go in, do their banking, talk to folks if they're looking at equity lines of credit or doing certain things that they're doing, businesses that are local and working with our business improvement districts and so forth. Will there be that level of conversations and accountability when it comes in when we're talking about servicing communities of concern?
Yes, that is, it's like you're taking the words right out of my mouth. It's access to financial services is certainly a pillar of the work that we do at Rise Economy through the Federal Community Reinvestment Act. So in many of our community benefits agreements, we've negotiated the opening of new bank branches and also commitments to not close branches in low or moderate income and communities of color. For the exact reasons that you're mentioning, it's very detrimental to communities to lose a bank branch, and it's so additive to open a bank branch. And developing those relationships with bankers and tellers, especially in areas where there's like a significant digital divide. You have older consumers that might not be equipped or able to utilize digital or online banking, and it certainly anchors a community to have a brick and mortar. So that is a value of ours and a priority, and something that's reflected in the federal CRA, and something that is also would be reflected in the state CRA. So that kind of expansion of access to financial services would be like a CRA or state CRA qualifying activity. It's something that would be encouraged for these institutions to do wherever they're able to do that.
Alrighty, very good. That will conclude my questions and comments. Any more questions or comments before we end this item?
Sorry, Kevin, but just responding, when I was listening to you, looking at access does not usually translate to benefits. So as you were speaking, I was just thinking like in terms of like overdraft fees that are being charged from these customers. Is there ordinance in that bill that is going to guarantee perhaps educational services, reinvestment about credit building? I mean, not credit building, but understanding the accessing credit services. I'm speaking on this because I know with IRC we serve clients who had no financial literacy, and when we look at our data for those ones who access education, financial education when they enter the program, those ones who just come here, start with the financial literacy education, And those ones who just go on and start their life, there's a significant difference in how they understand the financial education, just in terms of like checking their checking account, make sure that it's not going overdraft. Understanding the importance of not going over whatever overspending. It may look like something very minimal that the banks may not be able to do, but for those communities, maybe something more important for them to have that even starting at middle school age level going up, so that is something that people are used to. They are not just entering in adulthood and we are like, there is a bank, of course, there's a branch in this area, but if those services are not provided, we are not preventing those issues from happening. So I don't know if there's a provision in the bill to do that for the CRA services.
Yes, that's a really great question, and points to a need for a lot of our communities. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that, you know, in the federal CRA or our work with the federal CRA, we've been able to encourage banks to create those financial literacy programs, to be able to partner with nonprofits, to be able to develop and then also actually deploy those educational courses, whether it's like for young people, for elderly or older consumers, for folks who are looking to buy a home, or folks who are interested in entrepreneurship. There are so many levels of financial literacy and financial education that's necessary. And so we've been able to get that in our community benefits agreements with banks that are covered under the federal CRA. And this also includes, financial education in a variety of different languages. So there's also an attention to language access here. And so for the state CRA, that would certainly follow through. Now, some of these pieces, when you get really granular to like this kind of activity being a CRA impacted activity, and that might be something that is developed as regulations are written once the law has been passed. But that's certainly a priority of our coalition, is encouraging and incentivizing the delivery of financial literacy, financial education, so that folks are able to avoid financial traps, are able to avoid scams, especially impacting older consumers, and then are also able to build a level of financial stability and save, access credit, so that they can then become homeowners, they can become small business owners, and all of those things. So yeah, short answer, yes. Maybe long answer, also yes, but just a little bit more color to it.
And thank you for that. I think that's a very good point. And just from a practical place, we graduate high school, we hit a college campus, and you walk into a building and you see all of these credit card offers on the wall, and run out and get your first credit card and don't realize how detrimental that can be as you're trying to make ends meet in that freshman year and junior year. So very good point at reaching down to certain age groups and making sure folks are getting that literacy as they are developing and making sure they understand how these work, being an expert in this area of finance. So very good point. So with that seen, no more hands or any more comments or questions. That concludes item 6. And as a reminder, item 7 and item 8 have been returned, and those will be on a upcoming agenda as they are ready for our review and conversation. And with that, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. Thank you to the members of the public and staff for your participation. I appreciate the work that each of our task force members and guest speakers are doing to further the mission and objectives of the RTF. We'll now adjourn this meeting of the Reinvestment Task Force to our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is on Thursday, September 18th, 2025 at 9 a.m. We are officially adjourned at 2:54 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you.